The screen glowed with those two insidious words. A phantom limb of a past I'd meticulously severed, now twitching back to life. Thank you. It wasn't a question nor a plea, but a declaration, a chilling whisper from the abyss, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the carefully constructed fortress of my self-possession began to crack. My perfectly tailored sleeve, the smooth, dark wool a testament to my ascent, felt suddenly too tight around my wrist, the silver ring on my right hand, Peter's ring, digging into my flesh as I clenched my fist. The cedar and amber cologne, usually a subtle declaration of my presence, now felt heavy, suffocating, a scent clinging to the air like a shroud. That single chilling message was a poison dart piercing the very heart of my carefully constructed world. But the seeds of its ruin had been sown months earlier, when a series of utterly pathetic digital pleas began to intrude upon my meticulously curated existence. I'd resisted the commonality of a mobile phone for years, not out of Luddite stubbornness, but a more refined disdain. Such devices were for the masses, for those who craved constant connection, constant validation. I, Victor Kane, dictated my own terms. My network was built on a handshake, a precisely timed phone call from a landline, an invitation extended over a perfectly poured single malt. It was about control, exclusivity, but even a genius must adapt, in the sheer utility of a smartphone for managing my burgeoning art empire, or rather the illusion of one, became undeniable. So on my 25th birthday, I acquired one, a sleek obsidian rectangle that felt less like a tool and more like a new potent weapon. My friends, Emma included, had feigned relief, their eyes betraying a deeper, almost pathetic gratitude that I had finally deigned to join the modern age. I merely indulged their triviality with a practiced, disarming smile. The first message arrived a month later, a stark, uninvited intrusion from an unknown number. "I miss you." My brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in a flicker of annoyance. Who dared presume such intimacy? My mind, a finely tuned instrument for analysis and recall, immediately sifted through the detritus of my past. There were countless candidates, of course. People I had used, people I had discarded, people whose aspirations I had gently, irrevocably crushed beneath the heel of my ambition. But the dramatic flair, the thinly veiled desperation, screamed of one particular individual, Julian Vance. Julian, a preening peacock of an artist, utterly devoid of talent but overflowing with ego, whom I had, for a brief, regrettable period, allowed into my orbit. He'd been useful, a ladder rung, but ultimately a drain on my precious resources, both financial and emotional. I'd cut him loose with the surgical precision of a seasoned manipulator, leaving him with a vague sense of self-doubt and a hefty unpaid bar tab. I'd expected a resurgence, of course. Flies always returned to the honeypot, especially when they were as starved for attention as Julian. He'd undoubtedly cajoled my number from some mutual acquaintance, a pathetic attempt to reinsert himself into my sphere. The thought was nauseating. I considered replying a sharp, cutting retort that would remind him of his place. But then a more exquisite form of torture presented itself. Silence. It was a potent weapon, silence. It ate away at the fragile ego, fostering doubt, then resentment, then a raw, gnawing desperation. To be ignored by Victor Kane was to be erased, and Julian, with his insatiable need for validation, would find that utterly unbearable. A small, almost imperceptible curl of my lip, pathetic but oh so useful. The messages continued, a predictable, monotonous drip. "I miss you. I wish I could see you. I thought I saw you in a crowd today, but it turned out to just be a dream." Each one was a testament to his continued pathetic decline, a desperate plea for recognition. I would sometimes glance at them, a fleeting moment of self-congratulation for having escaped such a parasitic connection. My finger would hover over the delete button, but I always resisted. They were a reminder, a trophy of a past conquest, proof of my superior intellect and my ability to shed dead weight. They validated my trajectory. But then 8 months into this tedious dance, something shifted. It was a late evening, the kind where the city hummed with a low, oppressive energy, and the quiet of my apartment felt too vast, too empty. I'd been working meticulously, reviewing the provenance of a dubious Renaissance-era sketch, a potential acquisition that could either make my fortune or expose my precarious financial situation. The pressure was a constant dull ache behind my eyes, a reminder of the hunger that had gnawed at me in the crumbling tenement of my youth. Peter's small, pale face flickered in my mind, a ghost of a reminder of what failure truly meant. I twisted the silver ring on my finger, the tarnished metal cold against my skin. I couldn't save him then, but I would never be that helpless again. Never. A new message vibrated on the polished surface of my mahogany desk, breaking the oppressive silence. It was longer than the others, a verbose outpouring of sentiment that grated on my nerves. I miss you so much. I know you don't read these, but today of all days, I need you to know how much I love you. I'd do anything to see you one more time. Today of all days, I murmured, my voice a low, dismissive hum. Julian, always the dramatist. He was trying to tug at some non-existent heartstring, some fabricated shared history. Perhaps it was the anniversary of our brief, ill-fated entanglement. Or perhaps he was just particularly desperate. It didn't matter. What mattered was the opportunity. A slow, insidious thought began to form a dangerous curve in the meticulously planned road of my life. He wants to play games very well. I would indulge him. But I would change the rules. I would show him who truly held the strings. A surge of exhilarating power coursed through me. This wasn't about Julian Vance, it was about asserting my absolute dominance, about proving that no one, not even a persistent, pathetic shadow from my past, could dictate terms to Victor Kane. My fingers, usually so precise, moved with a deliberate, almost languid grace across the screen. I composed my reply, each word a carefully chosen arrow. If you want to come see me, then why don't you do it? And then, for good measure, a subtle hint that I knew his pathetic stalking. You know where to find me. It was an invitation, yes, but a challenge, a dare. A spider weaving a web, enticing the fly. I pressed send, the soft click echoing in the stillness of the room. A silent pact with fate. I could almost hear his frantic scramble, his pathetic excitement. He would come, of course. They always did. And when he did, I would remind him of the chasm between us. The following morning, the world felt different. The air in my apartment, usually crisp and clean with the scent of my cologne and polished wood, felt heavy, cloying. My head throbbed with a dull ache, not from drink. I rarely indulged, to excess control was paramount, but from a restless night spent replaying my calculated maneuver. 13 missed calls illuminated my phone screen, a pathetic testament to Julian's desperate attempts to reach me. I allowed a faint, self-satisfied smirk to grace my lips. He was precisely where I wanted him, under my thumb. A week passed, a period of blissful, almost unnerving quiet. No texts, no calls. Julian had finally learned his lesson. I congratulated myself on my exquisite ingenuity, my ability to turn a nuisance into a decisive victory. My pocket notebook, always close at hand, felt lighter, as if a minor entry had been definitively closed. I was Victor Kane, the master strategist, the puppeteer. Then came the knock. It was too early for Emma, too formal for a delivery. My perfectly tailored suit, a charcoal gray, felt like a second skin as I moved towards the door, my movements fluid, controlled. I opened it to reveal two men, their uniforms a stark, uninvited blue against the polished mahogany of my doorframe. The older one, his face etched with a weary solemnity, held my gaze. His partner, younger, sharper, stood a step behind, his expression unreadable. A strange cold sensation like ice water began to seep into my veins, a feeling I hadn't known since Peter. I pushed it down deep. Deep down. "Good morning, officers," I said, my voice smooth, perfectly modulated, betraying no hint of my internal unease. "Is there a problem?" They invited themselves in their presence, instantly shrinking the elegant space of my living room. I allowed it, my mind racing, constructing narratives, deflecting blame, assessing threats. What could they possibly want? No one knew about the sketch. My finances, while precarious, were not illegal. Had Julian done something truly idiotic? "Do you know anyone by the name of Ilara Finch?" The older officer asked, his voice low, deliberate. Ilara Finch. The name was vaguely familiar, a wisp of a memory. A struggling artist, perhaps. A gallery assistant I'd dismissed with a cutting remark. I sifted through my mental Rolodex of faces, of names, of weaknesses. Nothing concrete. "I can't say that I do," I replied, my tone perfectly calibrated to convey polite confusion. "Why do you ask?" The younger officer stepped forward, a printout in his hand, a sheet of paper covered in familiar, maddeningly persistent texts. My breath caught a sudden, sharp intake of air. "We found a series of texts to you on her phone," he stated, his voice flat. "We found only one reply from you." He held out the printout, and there it was, my own carefully crafted bait staring back at me. "If you want to come see me, then why don't you do it? You know where to find me." Reality began to dawn, a cold, nauseating wave. This wasn't Julian. This was something else entirely. The older officer's gaze was unwavering. "Did you receive these messages, Mr. Kane?" "Yes," I answered, the word a little too sharp, a little too quick. I corrected myself, smoothing my tone. "Yes, I did. But they were coming from an unknown number. I assumed they were from an old acquaintance, someone I'd had to cut ties with, a persistent individual." I offered a charming, self-deprecating smile, hoping to disarm them. "I thought they were trying to manipulate me, you see. To re-enter my life. And that's why you sent that reply." My throat felt tight. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. Sweat pricked at my temples. "Well, yes. I thought it would make them stop, to make it clear that I wasn't interested in playing their games. I was, perhaps, a little frustrated with the incessant nature of the messages. I believed I was putting an end to a nuisance. I couldn't stop the words from tumbling out, a desperate attempt to frame myself as the victim, the one whose boundaries had been violated. It was a rash decision, perhaps not my best, but I was simply trying to assert my privacy. The younger officer stepped outside, leaving me alone with the older one. His sigh was heavy, laced with a weariness that chilled me to the bone. "There seems to have been a rather unfortunate accident, Mr. Kane." "What do you mean?" My voice was barely a whisper. The coldness in my veins spread, reaching my heart, squeezing it in an icy grip. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder. Ilara Finch had a very difficult year. She was a student, a promising young artist, but she'd been struggling with severe depression following the death of her best friend, a young woman named Clara, in a car accident. Clara was her anchor, her inspiration. Ilara had retreated into herself, unable to cope. She'd been texting Clara's old number as a way to cope, to feel connected. The pieces clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic. The "I miss you," the "I wish I could see you," the "today of all days." It wasn't Julian. It was a ghost, a desperate, fragile soul reaching out into the void. And I, Victor Kane, in my infinite self-absorption, had answered. On the anniversary of Clara's death, the officer continued, his voice devoid of judgment, yet heavy with implied accusation. When Ilara was at her lowest, she finally got a response. Your response. If you want to come see me, then why don't you do it? You know where to find me." He paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, a terrible indictment. "She tried calling, but your voicemail wasn't set up." My stomach churned. The silver ring felt like a brand. Peter. Peter alone, sick, while I, a powerless child, could do nothing. The helplessness, the shame, it threatened to engulf me. No, I wouldn't allow it. I pushed the memory down, down, down. So the officer finished, his voice now almost a monotone. She did the only logical thing she could do given her state of mind. She reached for a box cutter she'd taken from her studio. She opened her veins. The words struck me like physical blows. Ilara Finch. A name I barely knew, a life I had so casually, so utterly destroyed. It wasn't a mark I'd played, not a pawn I'd moved. She was collateral damage, a weak mind easily broken. Not my fault she couldn't endure the slightest pressure. She was already teetering, I told myself, clutching at the flimsy threads of self-justification. I merely nudged her. They told me I wasn't to blame. Her father, a gaunt, broken man, offered me a shaky forgiveness that felt like a curse. Her mother, her eyes burning with an inferno of hatred, spat words at me that tore at the edges of my carefully constructed facade. I understood. To her, I had been the final push. The police reiterated over and over that Ilara herself had ended her own life. I was not legally culpable, but inside me the seeds of guilt, a foreign poisonous strain, spread far across my heart, growing like weeds I just couldn't uproot. It felt like Peter's blood on my hands, a phantom weight that lingered no matter how many times I scrubbed. I couldn't save him, and now, this. I had to be stronger. I had to be invincible. The year that followed was a blur of forced smiles, frantic networking, and a gnawing unease. I managed to get back on my feet to continue the relentless ascent in the art world, but Ilara Finch's death hung over me like a shadow, a persistent, unwelcome presence. No matter what I did, I just couldn't forget her, no matter how far away the incident seemed. The memory was a festering wound beneath my tailored suits, a discordant note in the symphony of my carefully orchestrated life. Yesterday was the anniversary of her death. I had forced myself through the day, a performance of normalcy, pretending I'd never heard that name, never heard that story, never felt that cold, creeping dread. I had even managed to convince Emma that I was merely overworked, my usual charm, a little frayed at the edges. It was going well until about 10 that night. I was unwinding a glass of aged scotch in my hand, the amber liquid reflecting the soft glow of my phone. Then the screen illuminated. A text from a number I had tried desperately to forget for the entirety of the last year. "Thank you." The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the polished hardwood floor, the rich liquid spreading like spilled blood. The scent of cedar and amber, my signature, my shield, seemed to mock me, clinging to the air. A silent witness to the cracking of Victor Kane,